So today I want to talk about defining your labels rather than letting your labels define you. So you can play along at home or play along in the chat. As we go, I'm going to give you a few prompts and it's going to help you to sort of explore the way that you describe yourself. I'm going to start really simple. I want you to think about words to describe yourself in one single word. Don't think too hard. What's the first thing that comes to mind? It could be about your career, but maybe it's about your gender, it's your name, it's your age, it's hobbies that you have, it's your relationship with your family. There's lots of different words that are labels to describe you. Let's be specific. Let's think about that job word. What is the job that you do? Try and think about it in one word. Write it down. Write down a few things if there are a few different words that can go in there. Chuck some in the chat. It's great to see who else is here. Go a little deeper. Think about a word to describe your personality, a word to describe who you are. Now this is a hard one, right? Like maybe you're more introverted, maybe you're more extroverted, maybe you're a happy person, maybe you're an intelligent person. Could be all sorts of things. So let's think about what a label actually is. Now, this definition that I've got for you on screen is actually from the Oxford Dictionary, all right? So a classifying phrase or name applied to a person or thing, especially one that is inaccurate or restrictive. That's the actual dictionary definition, and that's how we always think about labels. When someone says that they're labeling you, oh, I've been labeled, we kind of think we're being judged. And we think it's really holding us back. We have to fit in this little box of what the label means. It also is kind of inaccurate. It's not granular enough. It doesn't say enough about who we are or what we do. Well, I want to give you a little bit of a different definition. This is just my personal little update. So it's still a classifying phrase, a name applied to a person or a thing. But it helps us more easily remember, describe, and understand. Because that's originally what these labels are about. They're the words, they're the visual cues that we use to communicate and to understand the world around us. I'll throw a little quote in here. So this is from Daniel Kahneman. Now, he recently wrote Thinking Fast and Slow, great book if you want to pick it up. I won't go too far into it. Essentially, he splits up System 1 thinking and System 2 thinking. System 1 thinking be the more intuitive, automatic, and simple ways that we think about the world and receive these labels. System 2 being a little bit more considered when we stop to think things through in a more meaningful way. So this quote, "The world makes less sense than you think. The coherence comes mostly from the way your mind works." That's saying there is so much happening in the world all the time. Even just you watching this presentation from me, the amount of little things and little computations that your brain is making to understand what I'm saying and connect it to your life is astounding. It's the way that your mind works that makes that make sense. What I'm getting at is labels are not the enemy. They help us communicate quickly, understand ideas quickly, and act and respond quickly. You use labels every day, I guarantee it. As I said, you're using them now to understand what I'm saying. But whenever you speak to someone, whenever you're walking through the world and thinking about things and reacting to things, you're always using labels. And of course, you're using labels when you describe what you do and when you describe your work. You'll do this with your clients. And your clients use labels every day too. Your clients are using labels to talk about their own business, their own work themselves. They're using labels when they're thinking about and understanding your work and what you're like to work with. On that note, your collaborators will use labels every day to describe the type of person you are to work with and the style that you have. And of course, your referrers use labels every day. So those people who literally recommend you as someone that would be great for a project or great to engage with. And remember, anyone could refer you one day. Anyone. It's not just your clients, it's not just your collaborators, it's anyone that you speak to, family, friends, anyone on this chat right now or in the Framework Slack channels could be someone who refers you one day. And that means that how others describe you and how they understand you is important. It does matter what other people think. And you have some control of how that is. You have some control of the way that you interact with people and the way that you talk about and present your own work. Now, how you describe yourself, therefore, is even more important. How you introduce yourself, but also how you perceive yourself, how you speak to yourself, how you treat yourself. When you think about those labels and you think about ones that are more helpful and uplifting and aspirational, as you live up to those, you can grow your career each and every day. So let's look at that big dreaded label that usually comes out after this question: what do you do? And everyone freezes up, or maybe they sort of mumble something, or they say something that they don't really believe in. Now, some of you might have worked with Nick or myself before, might have done an exercise on this what do you do question where we dig a lot deeper and we think of a really powerful paragraph that can start a conversation, but sometimes there's no time for that. So I want you to think about this question just as a label. What if there is just one or two words that you need to use to describe what you do? Start thinking about those, start writing a few down. This is the part where I want you to sort of get involved and start using a pen to explore your ideas. As you do, I'm going to tell you my little story of how my labels evolved way since I finished uni and started working in the creative industry. So, step one, Francis the writer. That was my response to what do you do? I kind of got okay marks in uni for writing courses, and I thought I'd chase that. Hey, it was a hard skill, right? You all need a hard skill to make money out of. So I was like, right, I'll be a writer. I'll jump on onlinewritingjobs.com. That was actually the website. I'm not sure it exists anymore. This was over a decade ago. And I'll see what jobs are out there that I can have while I'm sort of backpacking around the world a little bit. I got a couple. It was stuff like SEO writer for airports for a little bit. Literally picture me on Wikipedia paraphrasing how many toilets are in the Mumbai airport or something like that. I was doing like terrible little student travel blogs, all horrendous, embarrassing, low pay kind of stuff. But I would introduce myself as a writer. So what was the question that I got immediately? This one. Oh, what's your novel about? Yeah, I wasn't writing a novel. And I think this is actually really common, particularly in the creative industry, right? If you're not involved in the industry, you often sort of be aspirational for the person. Someone says they're a writer, you think that they're writing a novel. Someone says they're a photographer, you're like, oh, have you shot anyone famous? Someone says they're an animator, you're like, oh, right, what Nickelodeon show are you working on? Right? And then when we're not doing that, particularly early in our career and we don't have much of a follow-up, there's sort of a shame that comes with not living up to everything that that label could be. The closest I ever got to being proud of being a writer was a sort of undeserved title of managing editor for this tiny student blog that a uni friend of mine started up that really meant nothing. But that kind of will be important in a little bit. At the time, freelance writer, freelance creative had these other labels attached to it. And they were labels that I didn't like, labels that held me back, that I was ashamed of, that I found really unhelpful. Was I eccentric, like trying to detach from, the rat race? Was I struggling? Did I just not have direction or know what I wanted to do with my life? Or was freelance just a fancy word of saying I was unemployed and couldn't get a job? Actually, it kind of was. So I went on to step two, Francis the bartender. I needed a bit of money. The writing thing just wasn't doing it for me. And look, honestly, I met some of my very best friends while I was bartending. I love hospitality. I'm still friends with a lot of those people today. But it wasn't what I wanted to do with my life. I was stuck in this one role and I didn't know what the path forwards was. I certainly didn't want to end up just owning a bar. Well, this was the question I got as a bartender, right? Nice. Can you give us free drinks? Well, yeah, sometimes I could. I was having fun, but I was wasting time. And I had those negative, sort of unhelpful labels popping up again. I was thinking myself as a bartender, but did that mean that I was just checked out, not really paying attention to my career? Was I turning into an alcoholic with those knockoffs after every single shift? Was I just immature and not taking my life seriously? All right, so I decided it's time to get back to it and try out that hard skill again. See if I could go back to being a writer. So here I am, next step, Francis, the job hunter. Now it's pretty confronting just to say that's who you are. I'm unemployed or I need work. Even as a freelancer, saying you're open to work, saying that you're not so busy and flushed with clients can be something that can be a bit embarrassing. Sometimes we need to do that just because we literally need the money. And a lot of the times it's also a bit about our identity. What is our identity as a career and then as ourselves? That's what we're searching for when we're searching for work. So I put my head down and I sent out 20 job applications. Okay, way more than 20 job applications, but more than 20 seemed really embarrassing to put on the screen. All around writing, I was going for jobs around editing and communications as well. That was sort of what my degree was named. And a lot of them were things that I don't know if I'd connect with them or not, but I just wanted to do something different. I ended up getting one job interview that I was really stoked about. Out of all those applications, there was one that I was like, yes, I'm excited about this job. Well, the potential of getting it anyway. So here's who's it for. It's the Big Issue. Now, editor of Big Issue, right? For those of you not in Australia, Big Issue is a not-for-profit who works with, who gives opportunities to the homeless, marginalised and disadvantaged. So the people on your screen will go out as vendors and help sell the magazine, and then they'll keep a cut of the profit. So it's giving them meaningful work rather than just sort of a charitable handout. So Big Issue, you know, big company, serious brand, right? Generated 33 million bucks for homelessness over the years, readership of over 288,000, social return of $5.50 for every dollar. Essentially, great social impact. What a big, cool company to work for. Was I going to be Francis, the editor of the Big Issue? Right? Recognized brand, legitimate. Giving back to the community, something that I could be proud of. When someone says, what do you do? If that's my response, I could honestly say I'd be proud of what I did. So I was excited, right? Time for the big interview. All right, so picture me here. I'm sort of in my mid-20s or something now, if you can believe it, smaller than I am now. I've got sort of long, shaggy hair down to here. I've come back from backpacking and, you know, I strum guitar around campfires and things. I put on my best shirt, which is not a great shirt. I don't have much fashion sense back then, even less than I do now. And off I go into the big city to a fancy cafe to meet up with a couple of people for this interview. Now, it's before the days where you could look people up on LinkedIn or anything like that, so I don't know what they look like. And as you can tell, importantly, they don't know what I look like yet. So I'm pretty sure that I got this interview because I had that title on my CV, the managing editor title that I mentioned before, back when I was working with that little student blog. Now, they mustn't have looked into the publication too much. It sounded impressive enough, and they thought, won't we give this guy a chat? He's already got some editing experience, you know, managing editor, big role. We'll bring him in and we'll have a chat through with him. So here I go, walk up to the cafe, and I go in, I'm looking around. I see a couple of women who are maybe in their mid-40s, sitting on a table, you know, sipping away at a coffee, not talking much. I think maybe these are the people. I kind of make eye contact with one of them, but she looks away. I look around, there's no one else, so I sort of walk up to the table, smiling, a bit nervous. I go, oh, Francis? I'm like, yeah. And then I didn't get the job because the very next thing that they said is, gee, you're younger than we thought. That's the label I got, straight away, as soon as they saw me, before we even said many words to each other. I was too young. I was too young to take on that role. right? They wanted someone with more experience, not just the title, but literally an older person. And look, some labels we can't control. And sometimes they work against us like it did for me on that day. But I was still, and am still, proud of just having that interview. And it was a really important moment in my life when I just realized that even just written down the writing experience that I had and the feeling that I had about maybe getting that communications and writing job, that turned me on to taking that writing communications path a bit more seriously. And I really thought about the labels I wanted to have and why I wanted to have them. So I embraced being a writer. And I stayed open to opportunities, even scary ones. And I embraced being a freelance writer. Now, little plug, if you're excited about that idea of embracing the scary opportunities and really leaning into it, a little later on today, quite a lot later on today in Australia, so 10:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Savings Time, Nico's going to be talking about the art of do more, and that's all about leaning in and really embracing that fear and doing something that scares you. So here I am embracing being a writer, and that led me to being Francis the Creative, which is a label that I still proudly use today. I jumped around through a few different jobs in communications, all of them sort of building up and helping me explore what I like to do. And then because I called myself a writer, a mutual friend of mine introduced me to Nick. And Nick and I worked on a little project together. It was just a tiny bit of copywriting for a website project that he was working on, but it was an excuse for us to connect. And here we are almost a decade later, and I'm running creative agencies, and I'm running creative communities, and I'm talking to you. So if I'm Francis the Creative, and I say that to people, I am a creative, what is the first thing that they think and do with that label? All right, so take a look at this painting on your screen. This is a Picasso style sort of Frida Kahlo, right? You can see the cubism, there's some interesting color use and something a bit dynamic. So last year, I went to a hen's night for a friend of mine. And one of the things that we did was we had to try and copy this painting. Sat down, we had like 2 or 3 hours, they sort of talked you through it a bit, you have a glass of wine and try and copy this painting onto a canvas. Something is not even close to anything that I'd done before. All right, now, these 3 paintings on your screen, one of them is mine. If you can guess which one is mine, go for it, chuck it in the chat, right? But it's really interesting what the guesses were, because people who didn't know what I did day to day, that I just introduced myself as a creative, picked some of the paintings, while people that know what I actually do day to day definitely picked another one. So the other paintings are by, one is by my wife, who is a psychologist, if that label helps you pick it. The other is by a friend of mine, who is a baker, an entrepreneur, and actually a writer. And the last one is by me, okay? So take a look at the first one, the one on the left of the screen. There's a lot of color in there, got kind of a stern, piercing expression, a bit of cleavage for some reason that wasn't in the original painting, so a bit risque. All right, is that one mine? Or is it the middle one? The middle one, it's a bit more creative, right? A little bit more, it's maybe some fruit instead of some hair. You can see, the face is sort of well proportioned, but endearing, you sort of lean in. Or is it the one on the right? Maybe the most creative license, right? Like it's sort of got some presence, looks sort of tough, maybe a bit less Frida Kahlo, a bit more sort of Greek warrior rugby player sort of thing. All right, so the big reveal is that people who I introduced myself as a creative to, but didn't really know what I did day to day, well, would 50% of them say I did the one on the far left, and 50% of them say I did the one in the middle. Anyone who actually knows me and has worked with me and knows that I can't draw or paint or do anything visual to save myself immediately says, oh, that's the one on the right. Now, let me put this into context. That is probably still the best painting I have ever done in my life, and I am still super proud of it. But look, I don't even get to the bottom of the canvas. What are the earrings? It's like, looks like a bullet on the right ear there. I stuffed up the size of the neck within about the first 2 minutes of the class and was never able to recover. All right? But what I'm trying to illustrate here is that labels help you with recognition and retention. They don't necessarily help you with accuracy. I do work in the creative field, and I work with people that create visual things all the time. But I'm not the hands-on person that does it. So when you use the broader label of creative, it's not accurate to tell you exactly what I do. Sometimes those little misconceptions can work in your favor, like people thinking that I'd done the more refined paintings just before, but sometimes they don't. So the labels that we choose and that we can have influence over have a really big impact on our lives. And that's what's brought me to where I am today. So labels that I use now are things like Francis the teacher, Francis the mentor, Francis the facilitator, who runs sessions like this and workshops like this. But where does all that labeling mumbo jumbo come from? So I'm going to take a little step into the world of psychology without going too deep for you. So often our behavior can lead to our labels, right? So the way we behave results in someone giving us a label. We're a loud person, we're a happy person. We just got qualified as a particular job. So, you know, I've just finished my design degree, now I'm a designer. But sometimes it works the other way. Our labels can lead to our behavior and certainly influence it. So think of self-fulfilling prophecies, stereotyping, even the really dark side of labels around discrimination and racism and sexism. There are a bunch of studies in labeling theory in psychology. I'm not going to go too deep on any of them. I'll just really high-level touch on a couple. But the initial research was all around criminals and deviants, so how being labelled a criminal can increase your chance of committing crimes. You get in a headspace that, well, if you're going to call me a criminal, it gives me permission to act like that. You can live up to that. After being convicted of a crime, that stigma can follow you around in society. Right? Immediately we think less of people, or we certainly think of them in a particular way when we know that at any point they've been a convicted criminal. Just think about how that would look on your CV, how employers respond to that, what happens to voting rights and things like that around the world. Beyond that, there are studies around intelligence. And in children, there was a study a while ago where kids labelled smart kind of actually got smarter. I'll butcher it a little bit, but the really short story is psychologists ran a test with a class of students, an IQ test, and they told the teachers of those students that this particular group performed 20% better on that IQ test than everyone else. But that wasn't the case. They just selected a group randomly and said to the teacher that this group has performed better on the IQ test than everyone else. These are the smart kids, right? That wasn't the case. They went off, come back in 1 year, and they run the IQ test again, for real. And it turns out that that group that they had told the teachers had done a little better actually did do better 1 year later by like 10 to 15 IQ points. So there are probably a few influences here, but it's an indication that teachers in the class are treating these kids like they are the smart bunch, and you live up to that label. You start to identify as that, you embody that, and maybe it becomes real. So labeling theory essentially breaks down into three main elements. The first one is how we perceive ourselves. It's giving ourselves permission to act out a label, or forgiving ourselves for acting out a label. If we consider ourselves a quiet or introverted person, then it's just natural for us to not be talkative at a networking event, right? That's just who we are, so we don't beat ourselves up. I mean, that's a good thing, but sometimes it might hold us back. Or think of the flip side, maybe really extroverted, so you talk over people a bunch of times and, oh, sorry, that's just who I am. Yeah, but that doesn't necessarily excuse the behavior. in every situation. If you're interested in looking into that and sort of deep diving into those conversations with yourself, coming up literally right after me and after Nick and I have our little Q&A, it'll be Jess Leongiu, and she's talking about conversations with yourself, so don't miss that one. Back to labeling theory, the second part is how society treats us. So number one, how we perceive ourselves. Number two, how society treats us. When you get a label, you get all the generalizations that are included with that label. So remember when I was labeled as a creative, people thought that I could probably paint well. When I was labeled as a writer, it's assumed that, oh, well, maybe, he's writing a novel. All those things come with labels, and we can't help it. It's the way that we quickly understand the world and quickly relate to people, whether we choose to or not. If you're interested in that, and you want to think about what those templates are for who you are, and how to sort of break those templates, then tomorrow at 8 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Savings Time, Alex Roberts is going to be talking about not following the script and writing your own. I can definitely recommend that one too. Back to labeling theory and that third point. So how we perceive ourselves, number one, how society treats us, number two, and number three, who we associate with. So when you label yourself a particular thing, particularly a particular job or hobby or something like that, you end up interacting and spending time with other people who label themselves something similar. Those are the people that you connect with. They end up being the people that inspire you, support you, that you get driven by. So building that community around you with the label, the aspirational label that you want to embrace, and lots of other people aspiring to own that label too, that's going to help take your career and your life in a direction that you can be a lot more excited about. Last plug, if you like that sort of concept in exploring the community that can help you, drive you forwards, then later today, Australian Eastern Standard Time at 8 p.m, Josh Dygraff is going to be talking about building your career through your community, and he'll dive a lot deeper than I did just then. All right, so let's get down to a little bit of practical stuff. Helpful labels versus unhelpful labels. Now notice that I've very deliberately not said positive labels versus negative labels. It's not good to classify things like that because labels can be good at times, bad at times, good for some people, bad for other people. So think of them more as helpful labels versus unhelpful labels. The labels that give you energy, drive you forwards, that you can be proud of, that are helpful, or the labels that hold you back, take you to a place that you don't want to go, don't seem like a good place to be in your head. Those are the unhelpful labels. So let's start thinking about those unhelpful ones. If you're playing along at home or in the chat, throw out, be bold, be vulnerable, chuck some unhelpful labels that you use to describe yourself into the chat. And let's start thinking about it. Let's start being open and talking about it. I'll share some of mine. I'm going to focus on my labels related to me in business. As I said back when I was talking about being a creative, I don't do a lot of the hard skill stuff. So my day-to-day is talking to people like I'm talking to you now, but clients, being in business meetings, doing the handshakes, all of that sort of thing. And I was doing that right from when I started working with Nick and Kim in the creative field. But I had some unhelpful labels, particularly in the beginning. First one is timid. Like I kind of held back, right? I wasn't confident in what I was saying, wasn't super confident in who I was, so I was being timid. Part of that was because I was small, and I mean physically small. I still have a bit of a hang up in my head that I have narrow shoulders and I'm not a, big macho dude, right? And I was really conscious of that. That exacerbated me looking like and literally being young. I was often talking to people who were older than me, business owners, CEOs, marketing managers. They had a decade plus of experience and I felt out of my depth. So inexperienced, right? I just didn't have the runs on the board. Did I really deserve to be there? Uninformed. I didn't know enough. I didn't actually know enough. I didn't have enough knowledge, content, info to give people. So I was uncertain. I couldn't be decisive in anything that I said. And that meant I ended up being a bit submissive. I'd let people walk all over me. I didn't really have my own strong opinion. And then I was just left unspecialized. Who was I in this room if I didn't have a hard skill, if I wasn't the specialist, the best at something? All right, so what's the impact of those unhelpful labels? Look, it kills your motivation. It changes the whole energy. I presented this a couple of times before, but just reading them out and the way that you talk about them, your voice drops and you pull back. When you're thinking about labeling yourself, things like that, well, why keep going, right? I'm so terrible with all those labels. Stops you challenging yourself. Stops you taking a risk. It stops you taking a big step forward that might change your life and might get rid of some of those labels. And in the end, it just gets you the wrong type of work. If you just embrace those labels and never try and challenge them, then you'll continue to embody them. And the type of work that you're going to attract is the type of work that those labels attract. So what are we going to do about it? How can we combat those unhelpful labels? So to discourage unhelpful labels, you can think of a few things like this. First of all, is it a fact? Is it a fact? Or is it just an opinion? Is it just a range on a gauge, or a little bit more this than someone else, than your idol, right? That's totally fine. That's very different than a hard fact. So do your friends and your family see it that way? Oh my God, talk to people about this stuff. The world is opening up a little bit to mental health, and if you have some people in your life, your partner, your friends, your collaborators, even people on this chat, people in the Framework Slack channels that you feel happy to talk about this sort of stuff, makes a really big difference. Just saying it out loud can make it seem kind of stupid, and people can help you challenge it. Say, well, why do you think you're like that? Like, give me an example. I don't see it that way. Essentially, we're ending up, is it a trait? Or is it just a reaction to a situation? Sometimes we give ourselves a label just because one time we did something. That was a blip. It's a one-off. It doesn't have to be the way that you act and respond forever. All right, so if you've been gathering a few of those unhelpful labels, put them up in front of you, and we're going to start challenging them with those little tools that we just had. I want you to try and reframe those labels. Think about, what is it about those labels, about my behavior, that's made me come up with that word? Is there an opportunity? Is there something better there? I'll show you how I did that with the labels before. So instead of timid, feeling like I was holding back, I'm looking at that as considerate. I'm not running into the room and like yelling my opinion, telling everyone to get out of the way. I'm starting a meeting, starting a collaboration, starting talking with the client by understanding what they need and making them feel heard. I'm unimposing. Yeah, I'm not the big muscly macho guy. And that's unimposing. It means I'm not intimidating anyone when I'm walking into a room. That's a good thing. Now, I'm a bit older now than when I had that label of feeling too young. But when I was young and I'd made it into those meetings and I was pushing myself to do those things, just the fact that I was there meant that I had to be competent in some way. Just the fact that you're pushing yourself to do that and you're willing to do it means that you're competent. And instead of inexperienced, yeah, I didn't have the runs on the board, but I was open. By being there, you are having more experience. Every time you're challenging yourself to chase one of those aspirational labels or one of those aspirational positions or projects, you're gaining experience and you're being open to opportunities. That's only going to help you grow. Instead of being uninformed, I'm being collaborative. I don't know everything. That's fine. No one likes to know it all, right? So because I don't know everything, I can ask a lot of questions. I can be a good listener and contribute where I can and collaborate. Instead of being uncertain, I'm curious. I literally want to know everything about my clients, everything about my collaborators, everything about the project that we're working on. And instead of being submissive, I'm seeing that as diplomatic, right? I'm not forcing my opinion down other people's throats. I'm making sure everyone's heard, and then using one of what I see is now one of my best traits, right? To try and bring all these things together. And last of all, instead of being specialized, which I still don't think I am, right? It's being resourceful. And that's something that I can embrace. I know that I don't have the final answer for a lot of things, and I'm probably not the best or only person to ask for a lot of things. So I'll take it on myself to be resourceful and find those right people. So play along at home. See if you can do that with a few of your unhelpful labels. Consider the behavior and what is happening when that unhelpful label is really hitting you and you're really feeling it. And see if you can think of another word, a more helpful word that you can embrace and lean into. So what's the impact of those helpful labels? All right, number one, gives you energy. When you're talking about a helpful label, when you're thinking about a helpful label, yeah, you want to step forwards, you want to lean into that, something that you can be proud of. Might be a bit of anxious energy, but still that's excitement. It makes you want to live your life, and it makes you more courageous. It makes you take the risks that'll really make a difference each and every day. And lastly, little by little, it is going to position you as specialized. Because the more that you lean into your labels and the more that you make a decision to define and decide which labels you want to embrace, the more niche you're going to become. The type of work that you're going to get is going to be more specific to those labels and therefore more specific to the type of person that you want to be. So how do we encourage those labels? So step one, be deliberate. Don't just let labels happen to you. Take action, be active. Think of the labels that you want to embrace. Not just the words to describe what you do, but the style that you have, the type of person you want to be, how you want to be when people say, they're great to work with. Why? What does that mean? Explore that. Find those labels that you want to aspire to and deliberately write them down, think about them, and try and embody them. And when you don't, when you slip up, hold yourself accountable. And I don't mean beat yourself up or fall into a shame whirlpool, right, of like, I didn't nail my labels today. Just be present and mindful of it. Notice what it was that caused you to act in a way that you weren't so proud of. Think about what you want to do next time so you can get closer to the label that is really close to your heart. And when you do, when you take a big risk, when you achieve something, when you do something that really embraces those labels, you've got to celebrate those wins. Celebrate with yourself first, right? Stop at the end of a day when you've done something big and that took a big step, and give yourself a pat on the back. Whether it went well or not, the fact that you did it, that you're gaining that experience and putting yourself out there is great. And then share it with someone else if you can. Could be your partner, could be your friends, your family, could be people in the Framework Slack community, whatever. Talk about it. Because the more that you talk with emotion and energy and pride about your achievements, using labels that you want to aspire to, the more that the people around you will know you by those labels, and the more that you will know yourself by those labels. When those labels are the things that are first things that come to mind for you and to other people, again, that is going to drive you towards a career and a life that you'll enjoy, that you can be proud of, and that you defined for yourself. All right, so let's sum up. Labels can change the way we feel about ourselves and the way we behave. So you really need to decide which labels you want to use. The labels you embrace can influence the direction that you grow. Think about them regularly. Don't just pick some now and set and forget. Check in again in a month. Does the label still feel right? Does it need a tweak? What does that label mean to you? If you can't commit to a label, it seems a bit too daunting to throw yourself in and give yourself maybe a senior creative label. Well, I challenge you to define it. Think about what that label means. What do you have to do? What behavior do you have to have? What do you need to tick off where you will feel okay allowing yourself proudly to give yourself that label. And using that, you can set some goals, you can set some behaviors that you want to embody so you can strive to get there. And when you do, for God's sake, you've got to celebrate it with yourself, and you've got to tell everyone so they know what your labels are and who you are. So please, take the time to define your labels and don't wait. The minute that you hear a label, either in your own mind or from someone else, that you don't like, try and stop it in the moment. Pull yourself up, think, no, I don't want to be that way. Mention to someone, say, oh, actually, I didn't mean to come across that way. Can we talk about it, right? Do it straight away. Try and start interacting with your labels on a more regular basis. Because if you define your labels won't define you.